I once lost my Darth Vader ring, and it's really difficult to replace because it's an FAO Schwartz sterling silver limited edition Darth Vader ring that I got in Vegas, and it's nearly impossible to find one just like it online anywhere. But I mean, don't worry, I found it. But that isn't exactly like the true loss of a daughter, or of course, a doll for that matter. So I guess that story doesn't really track here. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I am quite pleased to have with me today debut writer-director Maggie Gyllenhaal for The Lost Daughter. And I got to say, I absolutely love this film. The Lost Daughter is so complicated, yet so simple at the same time. It is just a great look into someone's psyche. And of course, the things that troubled them many years ago and still haunt them today. And I'm so glad that we got to have this chat because Maggie Gyllenhaal did such a fantastic job with this, her first produced screenplay. And there's a lot to talk about. And luckily, she was very generous with her time and was really great at examining her creative process and what it took to make The Lost Daughter. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you've never read us before, I hope you test drive us by reading our free issue. And if you like what you read, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you want to, I am here to sweeten the deal and offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. We recently published our winter issue, which has a Dune cover. There are so many great stories in there, and we keep adding new stories because that's what we could do as a digital magazine, and that's what we did. So we have a great story for Star Wars Visions, the anime show on Netflix, and we interviewed the Japanese directors through a translator, and that's a really cool story that we just added. We also have a big piece on the Nichols Fellows, and we interviewed each of them, and we have excerpts from their Nichols Award-winning screenplays. So there is a lot to see in the new issue of Backstory. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoom interviews go. So you could watch these interviews too. Always remember that. It would mean a lot to me to have you all support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer-director Maggie Gyllenhaal about her debut feature film, The Lost Daughter. Okay, Maggie, it's great to see you. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
It's been a hot minute, but the last time I got the pleasure of interviewing you was in 2009 at a screening that I did at the Los Angeles Film School for Crazy Heart with you and Jeff Bridges and Scott Cooper, and it was before your Oscar nomination for that film, and I had to ask then if you were dabbling in writing at all, and you said that you were. And I think it went in great results these years later. But it makes me ask, had you been writing other screenplays that haven't been produced? Because this marks your writing, directing feature debut that has been produced. I'm curious if there's other screenplays you've been writing over the years.
No, this is my first screenplay.
Wow.
I wrote a screenplay in college. I probably have it somewhere. But
what was it called?
It was called Buffalo Jump. I don't think it was.
Do you remember what it was about?
Sort of. It maybe is interesting. I mean, it's probably, I have these little boxes of, like 2000 to 2005 and 2005, 2010, and it's probably in there somewhere. I just realized my name on the screen says my husband's name. Yes. And I'm in his office because he's got the best lighting. But anyway, it's really me. So yes, I wrote that, and I don't know. I have to say, I've always been somebody who understands my own thinking through writing. I'm not like, I don't really keep a journal. I don't mean like that. I mean, like if I have to write a very important email or give a speech somewhere, something like that. I mean, I remember a piece I wrote for Planned Parenthood at one point that I worked on for weeks, and I came to understand my own thinking, subtle thinking, by writing it down, by working on it. And I guess even in a way as an actress, the way I take apart a scene, the way I understand it is not that unlike the way I worked on my adaptation, in terms of understanding what is the event of this scene in a book? What is the reason for this scene to exist? Even if it's not explicitly about that, you don't ever say what the event is out loud.
Of course. And so
What
that means you
purpose?
broke it down like you would as an actor, breaking down a script in which you're trying to get into the mindset of the characters.
At first I did, because I was working from a piece of source material and I
Yeah.
already had a text at first. I mean, basically what I did was I took this book, which I felt was very reliable in terms of like its core, its center, its truthfulness, that was very wise and reliable. And I thought, okay, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go through it start to finish. I'm going to, like I said, like you said, I'm going to break it down in the way I would as an actress. Very kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of in my rhythm of work now, but kind of like classic actor studio. Like, what's the event? And what do these people need? And what's the obstacle to what they need?
Yeah.
And then once I could distill that about each scene, and what I mean by that is like, so say for example, you have a scene in a book or in a film about people like ordering a sandwich at a deli counter. That's what's happening. But who cares? People ordering a sandwich at a deli counter. What is it really about? What needs to happen in that scene emotionally? Otherwise, it will fail. Well, you can decide all sorts of things. You can decide it's an apology. Even though I'm saying I'll take a bologna sandwich and you're saying I'll take a turkey sandwich, that the purpose of this scene is to have an apology. Or we can decide it's a seduction, or we can decide whatever we want, really.
You're right. Like, and you're talking about adding the subtext to the scene to drive it forward. Hitchcock said it best. Two people talking at a table is boring. Two people talking at a table that a bomb is underneath ticking away is exciting. So you're
Not
right.
only adding the subtext, it's the whole point,
Yeah.
Like, I never like movies where the event of the scene or even the subtext is expressed out loud, ever. I never want to see that. I'm like, I want to think of it and figure it out myself. And I want the meaning of the scene to be complicated enough that it's not easy to write down in a sentence.
Sure.
But so first, I guess, yes, I started like that. And also, so sifting through, is this important in terms of the storytelling? Is this important in terms of my storytelling? What's the event? And then how do you make it cinematic, So first is almost like a puzzle. Then I had a draft that's
Wait. You're getting ahead because I want to get to that. You're getting ahead. I have two more questions before we get there. But actually, I've got to ask this so I don't forget. Because what you're referring to is going through the book and probably underlining, highlighting. One of my favorite things. Francis Ford Coppola produced a book version of what's called the Godfather Notebook, and it's basically a scan of every single page that he used of Mario Puzo's Godfather, and it shows what he underlined, what he wrote in the margins, and then typewritten pages of the questions he was asking himself. When you went through the book, were you highlighting, stripping down, and then having your own notes like that? Was that key to your adaptation process?
Yeah, I could show you.
I'd love to see some of this.
I have the book up in my office.
That's great.
Yes, I was not kind of like writing pages and pages. I was more, my book is written all over. At first I couldn't, the names of all the characters, the women are so similar. Leda, Elena, Nina. I was almost like mapping who was who. I was, going through totally with a pen in my hand, 100%. Yeah.
That's great. I've never been able to ask this question before. I think only I get asked this too. I've been interviewing folks for a long time about writing and had the good fortune of interviewing your mother, Naomi. Naomi Foner is a screenwriter in her own right. I interviewed her for B Season way back in 2005. And your father, Stephen, is also a writer-director. And I'm curious, as you were starting out on your journey, was there anything that you talked to either of your parents, who are both established in their own rights, about their creative habits that maybe informed your own?
Yeah. I talked a lot to my mom. It's interesting. We just had a really interesting conversation about something else that I'm writing. She said, originally she said, you need to know in like a sentence what your piece is about. And she was actually saying that to me about, so I didn't write this other script. You were asking me if I'd written other scripts, but I had optioned a book and was thinking about how to break it down a few years ago, a while ago. And I remember her talking to me about that and saying, what is it about? This is a really, really hard adaptation. Like, what is it about? And I was like, oh, it's about this to me, because it's the same. It's like, it's the same as an event. In an acting scene, I can be like, this is 100% a seduction. And you can be acting opposite me and say, oh no, this is 100% an apology. And that's fine. And then that's okay. It's also like directorially, you have to have your own way through a piece of material. So it's interesting. That's one thing she really said to me. And I kind of agree. And recently I was talking about, another project with her. And she was like, she said, you're really different than me. She said, you need to know, she said, she needs to know very, very clearly before she begins what the ultimate kind of point is of the piece. And I need to have an idea. I need to know what the territory is, but I also really need the space to let it emerge as I'm writing. Like I was recently trying to do a treatment. And I totally understand the value of that, but I was like, this is like really mediocre what I'm coming up with because it's so formulaic. You're like, none of the life of, oh, I didn't even know that these two lines together, now that I'm reading it back, are reverberating and meaning this. If you have to write down what everything is about and what it means before you've begun. So that's interesting. She and I were talking about how we work differently. I do agree with her. Fundamentally, you have to have a sense of what you're after and what you're into.
Sounds like you like the exploration a little more.
I do. I need
discovering it in the moment.
Exploration. Also, I realized something else about like what appeals to me. Maybe I'm going on a tangent now, but I, at least at the moment, I'm really compelled by like, okay, again, you have a story. Let's say it's at the beach and like mine, and it's about a woman on vacation. Oh, look, my thing is making noise, even though I turned it off.
No big deal.
Anyway, so like mine, okay, it's a woman on vacation. It takes place now. It's whatever. It's floating. The story itself, the narrative is kind of up here, but I don't think I would be as interested in that story if it weren't also like mythic. That's the word I've been using. Like,
there you go.
It could hit into really the deep vein of our sense of myths, our sense of the ineffable, our sense of like really what's down under, or the unconscious, for example.
That brings me to your creative habit for a second. I'm curious if you outline before you write, because some writers do, some writers don't. There's no one way to do it. Is outlining important to your process?
Well, in a way, yes. Like, not like 1A, 1B, I don't know, but I have to have a sense of something, some map of something. Yeah. And like I was starting to say, with The Lost Daughter, I started with the book, with that as my structure. And then I didn't put everything in, and I definitely let things go. Mostly though, my first movement through it was following that structure.
Sure.
Then I showed it to my mother, and I showed it to Amy Herzog. She's so great. She's done so many great things. She's a playwright, but also a screenwriter. And she and I were working on a project together as an actress. She just did Is for Marriage. Yeah. She worked on that and a lot of other things, but she's a really interesting writer. So I showed it to them too first. And they both gave me the same note, which was really interesting. They both said, okay, so I won't spoil anything we were talking about, but there's a reveal. There's an important reveal in the movie.
I know what you're talking about.
In the book and in my first draft, it happened about halfway through the movie in the toy store scene.
Got it.
And both women, when they read it, said to me, you absolutely have to push this back.
Save it for later. That's a great note.
But I was like, at first, because I really, defensiveness, I think, is like the death of good work. Sure. But I find sometimes with writing, I start a little defensive because it's so much work. I was like, but no, if you hear this reveal and this very difficult, painful thing about this woman, then you have to live with her for the second half of the movie. That's what happens in the book. It's
That's
really
valid.
compelling. It's really interesting. And then I thought about it a little more and I was like, no, they're right.
Well,
So what
it's a
it
valid
did,
point, and we'll get into it later. But I mean, the reveal, without spoiling it right now, it could have been something that, you're right, was a great weight on her. But the way that you used it, by having the reveal occur later in the third act, it kept the mystery and drive a little
yeah.
present
Yeah, I
and
agree. Like, what's
sustainable for the
happening? Who
yeah,
is, why is she doing this? What's going
right,
on? Yeah, but what happened is when I took that note, because it was a big structural shift,
yeah,
it kind of exploded my script. And all of a sudden it was like in pieces on the floor. And that was amazing because what that did, even though it was a lot of work, and there were other notes like that did that other times actually, but is it made space for me. And all of a sudden, the whole structure could shift and change, and things that weren't in the book at all started coming up and coming through. I stopped writing with the book under my arm. I really, it really freed me up. It was really
that's
great.
great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great moment to be able to articulate, because every writer, if you're too married to the work and not putting any of yourself in there,
Yeah.
and not expanding a little, like, I'm sure you were reverent to the book at the end of the day, but
Well, to its soul. I mean, I feel like my movie and my script are totally in conversation with the book,
well,
but they're very different. You
yeah.
know.
I want to get into those details in the spoiler section. So I'm going to race through a couple quick questions. You don't have to give the answers too long, because I want to get to the spoilers. But just when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit each day, or a certain amount of hours? Just briefly tell us what a day of writing is like for you.
No, I never get a day of writing. I have two kids. There's always stuff. And when I
Sure.
wrote The Lost Daughter, I was acting in The Deuce and doing press for the kindergarten teacher. So I was like, I found a lot of my work happens just in my head. I'm thinking, I'm breaking something down.
Yeah.
You know what I need?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
need like space. I just need space. Like, no, not page count. Mm-mm.
Okay. How long did it take you to write your first draft?
Kind of a while because I was doing two other jobs. I mean, probably no, first draft, I'm not sure. To get to a script where I was like, I'm sending this to Olivia Colman, a year.
That's good to know. And then if you get writer's block, what do you do to battle it?
It's the same with acting. It's like, how do you get in touch with something? You're unconscious. And for me, it's about space. I trust that if I can, okay, I do have this feeling sometimes with writing and with acting, less with directing so far. No, I mean, no, directing too, where you're like working something. You're like, it's like you're moving in a direction. It's like work and it's hard. And then there's a moment where you just have to go like, okay, back up, just walk, step away, especially with acting, because you can fuck something up by getting too in your head. Maybe writing too, but it's a little bit less like emergency, you can just give the most valuable thing for me right now is space.
Sure.
It's very valuable because I have two kids, so like someone asked me like, where's my ideal place to write? I was like, wherever,
Yeah.
I can close the door, I can't go to like Switzerland right now.
That's a great answer. Well, so, of course, people know this, but I just want to bring it up because it couldn't have been easy for you. But actually, you were lucky in a way. Elena Ferrante, who wrote The Lost Daughter, it's a pseudonym. We don't know who she is. And you were able to get the rights in 2018. And, there's people all the time that are adapting books where the author is deceased and there's no way to communicate. I'm curious how much communication you were able to have with her, and if she ever gave you notes.
Yeah, well, I had to appeal to her initially for the rights to the book. And I wrote her a letter, which I told her I don't know exactly how I'm going to do this, but I told her why I wanted to do it.
Okay.
Which was basically, her book is stunningly honest, shockingly honest.
Yes.
She's truthful about things that we have agreed as a culture not to talk about, not even to think about. And she
Absolutely.
breaks the agreement. And she does it totally uncompromisingly. And I sort of said to her, what if all of us, instead of all of us alone in our rooms, having this kind of like electrifying moment of hearing the truth expressed, what if you could actually you could actually hear it? You know, you could put and in a communal space like a movie theater where you might be sitting next to somebody who, like your husband or your mother or your daughter. That seemed like a really radical thing to try to do. And I think she was compelled by that idea. I think that's like a legitimate reason to want to adapt something into a movie.
Absolutely. Was there any other communication? Did she ever read a script or give you notes?
So she gave me the rights, and she also said, you can only have the rights if you direct it, which is pretty awesome. It was something I needed at the time. Then I started working, and then she wrote this thing in The Guardian where she used to write this biweekly column, which was basically about my adaptation, which she hadn't read, but she knew was happening. And she said that she wanted to offer me real artistic freedom, that it was very important to her that the movie be good. And she knew that the only way that it would be good is if it were mine. And that particularly because I was a woman, she didn't want to restrain me in the way that like women artists had been, restricted and for so long. So she offers me this freedom, which I took. And then to be honest with you, I did not use her as, I'm sure she would have been such an asset to me, but I felt shy and I didn't want to show Elena Ferrante draft until I was like, this is good. So I waited until it was like pretty much ready. And I had been through a bunch of drafts and felt very, felt confident about it. And then she read it and she gave me a couple of notes, which were great. She said something which I really agree with and knew to be true, but she articulated it really well. She said it's really important that Leda not be crazy. And I completely agree. I think if she's crazy, there's no reason to make the movie, because then it's just about validating ourselves of how sane we are and that we would never do anything like that, as opposed to offering the audience an opportunity to look at themselves and to relate to her. And to widen the spectrum of what's normal in terms of being alive in the world and being a mother. And she also told me to cut a sex scene, which I didn't cut. She said maybe you want to, until the cut in the edit I did.
Right.
Just a minor thing. And then there was one other thing. Oh yeah. She said, I guess I can share this. She said, the secret to the doll is, I don't know why I took the doll, which I think is pretty.
That's a great note. Well, so I want to get into the spoilers. Budget and schedule. What was your budget and schedule for this, your first feature?
I feel like I'm not allowed to say what the budget was. We had no money. We had no money. And we had 28 days in Greece.
Oh, wow. Okay. 28 days. Yeah. All right. Well, I am getting right into the spoilers. Podcast listeners and iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where these Zoom interviews go. If you have not yet seen The Lost Daughter, press pause. It's probably in your pocket on your phone. If you are a Netflix subscriber, it's on Netflix. Go watch it. Please do not watch it on your phone, though. Please watch it on a big old screen and then come back and hear the rest of this conversation, because we're getting into the spoilers right now. There's a lot to cover, but you said something that's really important about this movie that I think is one of the things that just gets a reaction out of people. And it's that it's not a common story. And she's showing raw things that you don't usually see. A common trope is the wife isn't getting enough from her husband, therefore decides that she's going to explore on her own outside the marriage. And, here we see Leda raising the kids. It's kind of unequal, but it's not horrible, but it's stressful. And, she doesn't think twice about cheating, which is usually something in a movie that needs a lot of justification for apologizing later or not. And it's rare that you see somebody do what she does in this movie, which is cheat, but then pretty much unapologetically abandon her children and husband and decide to go off and pursue a new relationship, which she does. And the film does not get into the relationship because it has a flashback structure. But I'm just curious if that was what you were talking about as part of the moral compass that you rarely see in a movie, because I thought it was wild.
I don't think she leaves her family to pursue this other relationship. In fact, at one point she says, I left him. That's not why. I think, and I don't think it's that there's no consequences and she doesn't feel that she doesn't hesitate. Anyone would hesitate before, it's unless you're something has to be a little off if you don't hesitate before, having an affair. But yeah, I guess I don't punish her for it. I don't feel like that's the point. I think
what I mean is she comes home from the trip and she's, in the flashback structure that you have, she comes home from the trip and she's leaving her daughters and her family, and her husband's begging her not to go. And as we learned from her own admission, she left for 3 years. Now we never see how the relationship went or how it went when she came back. And so I'm curious if those were elements that you ever explored, because it is just like a very unexpected turn.
Well, you know that you're dealing with a woman in the present day who's so anxious that she can barely walk down the street without feeling like she's going to pass out,
Right.
who's definitely um, living with a kind of pain that's almost unbearable. And you have to imagine the effect of her having walked out on her kids and what effect that has on her children. You don't get to see that. You don't ever get to see them once they're grown. But so I don't think the idea is that there's no consequence or that it was easy. I think it was because of what you see in Olivia later playing Leda in the present day. It's clearly taken a massive toll on her. This
Absolutely.
movie is not in praise of walking out on her kids. But
No, and I'm sorry if it came across that way. I was really asking, which she does it just so unabashedly and so fast. And you're right, the rest of the movie are those waves resonating and catching up to her later in life. But in the present moment, in the flashback, she rushes into it.
I mean, that's for you to imagine, I think, right?
Sure.
You don't get to see that. And also it's not that she like has the affair and then she goes home and she leaves her kids. I think I think you do have to imagine like all of the flashbacks. The flashbacks aren't like, and this is the next day, and this is the next day, and this is the next day, and this is the next day. They're flashes of the things like memory does, like real memory does. You skip the boring parts,
Sure.
you go to the parts that make you, oh God, I just remember that knife, that cut my finger, or I remember that kiss, or I remember, and the rest of it, you sort of, I remember standing in the hallway and whatever, the rest you skip. And that is definitely also the way that it's constructed. You could have a memory that's really intense that takes 1 second. That happens in the movie. You could also have a memory that's really intense. You're sitting on a beach and you realize, wow, for a half an hour, I was in 2006 somewhere else completely. So I think we have to imagine, and I think the language of the movie does set up that we don't know exactly how long it took or exactly what happened, but something about that thing with Peter, with Professor Hardy, and something about that thing with the hiker, and something about the everyday grind of what she's being asked to do, eventually puts her in a position where she walks out the door.
At first, you think she sees sympathy because she's on the beach on vacation and she's seeing another mother who's overwhelmed by her daughter. She sees Nina. And through the early flashbacks, you see that she, as a mother, also juggling a job, was having trouble as a parent and was alone, and she gets physically abusive with her daughters. She is hitting them. She's breaking glass and doors.
I don't think she's physically abusive. I mean, she smacks her own face. She doesn't hit her kids, and she, by mistake, yes, she gets so angry that she smashes a door. And I think she doesn't mean to, but she slams a door so hard that a glass breaks. I think physically abusive is not accurate.
Sorry, you're right.
But I think it's very important to say she's not physically abusive. That's a very different story.
Of course.
this is a woman who, in a way that unfortunately, even if we like to wish it weren't true, who is like at the end of her rope, and which is a very, very common experience in terms of parenting for everybody, but she is not physically abusive to her kids.
I'm not trying to make her into a tormentor at all, but
Yeah, yeah,
she has a very negative attitude and is very overwhelmed with her kids at a few certain points, which
yeah,
also I think would feed into her decision to leave for a few
yeah,
years. And
yeah.
I'm curious if there was ever anything about her relationship with her own mother, because the title itself, you could say, who is the lost daughter? It's not just the girl on the beach briefly. You could say that Lita herself might be a lost daughter, and the
Sure.
relationship she had with her own daughters was clearly lost by abandoning the family for a while. And as you said, it's never clear how close they are or are not. We only pick it
Yeah,
up in phone conversations. So I'm just
yeah.
curious what the title means to you.
I agree with you. I think who the lost daughter is could be everyone, anyone, and in the movie, in the book, there is more about her relationship with her mother, and I let some of that go. I think there's a lot more about class in the book, which I again let be very much kind of under the surface. At one point, there's that scene with Callie where she says, where are you from? Where are your people from? She says
Right.
she's from Leeds. She says, oh, fancy. She says, no, not fancy. And then there's just that incredible moment with Jesse Buckley where her husband says he's going to take the girls to her mother's, and she flips out and full of rage and says they're going to sink into the black shithole that I came from, and so a lot of that is implied without being too literal. But yes, in the book there's more about her also really fraught relationship with her own mom.
As you said, Elena told you not to make her crazy. And now that we're in the spoiler section, aside from helping the family find their lost daughter on the beach briefly,
Mhm.
she one of the other things that's plaguing the young girl that was lost on the beach and the family is that Lita steals her doll. And
Mhm.
you brilliantly reveal it by not showing her actually taking the doll, but
Mhm.
having it as a mystery point in which she opens her bag and the girl's lost doll is in the bag.
Mhm.
And it makes us wonder
Mhm.
what is going on with Lita? Why would
Mhm.
she do this? And
Mhm.
as you said, the reveal was suggested that you keep it later.
Uh,
And I want to talk about that reveal for a moment because you also placed it in the most perfect place in
mm,
which Nina is cheating on her husband. So there's a
mhm.
parallel there to
Mhm.
Lita's own life
Mhm.
of
Or
how
she's thinking about cheating on her husband.
right. Well, they
Yeah,
want
yeah,
her apartment so that her
yeah.
and Will, the cabana
Can make
boy,
stuff.
the guy running
Yeah,
the beach, could have sex.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
were very straightforward about why they wanted her apartment. But you're right, they
yeah,
haven't done it yet. And
yeah.
and, and Nina is questioning it, and Lita's having a very open, heart to heart, mother to mother conversation with her about how
Mhm.
it never gets easier, and she doesn't know what to say. But
Mhm.
when she reveals that she stole the lost doll,
Oh, at the end,
yeah,
yeah,
like this end conversation that they have. And
yeah.
basically she says, quote, I'm an unnatural mother, and
Hmm.
has no real defense for herself. Like she could have easily said, look what I found. Like it turned up finally. Don't pay me the reward money. She feels that because they're having this heart to heart and that Nina has revealed the secret side of herself, that she's considering stepping out of her own relationship and having an affair. It's fascinating that Lita tells her that she took the doll and she now has decided as an act of mercy to give it back because it was making things really difficult for Nina as a parent. Tell us about that scene and what it took to have all those spinning plates come together so seamlessly in that moment that ends with Nina stabbing Lita with a hair with her hat pin.
Okay, so many things to say. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, the scene that I, in fact, was delayed, that the reveal I was talking about, that Amy and my mother both told me to push back, was her saying she'd left her kids.
Oh,
So
okay.
so that originally in the book happens in the toy store, and I had it happen in the flea market. and then see the memory of it in the flea market also.
Gotcha.
But I think it's interesting what you're asking me. So I remember showing the movie early on to somebody. I don't know this person, actually. It was a friend of one of my producers. And their note was, does she have to take the doll? You're like, yeah, she does. She does. Because we're setting up a really big challenge here for the audience. And it's so interesting with the doll, right? Because you're like, a lot of people have asked me, what does it mean? Why does she take it? What does it symbolize? And the truth is, it's a straight lift from the book. Of course, I didn't make up that plot point. That's from the book. But in my mind, in so many ways, it's unanalyzable and yet understandable. And I do think that, and this is in the book too, in a way, she knows she took it. She is sane, but in some other way too, at the same time, she opens her bag in the car and she's actually surprised that it's there. And those two things can exist at the same time. Yeah. And we understand that feeling, So, look, yeah, you're right. She could have been like, oh, weird. Look what I found on the beach. But she's a hero. She is a hero. She's somebody who is brave enough to look at the most fucked up, perverse, shameful parts of herself. And from being brave enough to do it, and look, it took her 20 years, she finds ultimately a little bit of relief and a little bit of life. And if she'd lied to Nina and said, I don't know where I just found this doll, it doesn't work. And another thing I think is, I don't know, as mean and cruel and sort of strange, selfish it is to take this doll, there's also a kind of a gift in it. Nina was moving around in her life, totally dissatisfied, starving, not happy. And it's as if she'd pulled the keystone out of an archway for her. And everything fell apart. Now, is that a gift? In some ways, that's an awful thing to do to someone. On another level, it can really be a gift. So, and I actually, when I look at it, I think, okay, maybe Nina stabs her because she took her daughter's doll. That's kind of crazy. Maybe Nina stabs her because she says, is this going to pass? Am I going to feel better? And she says, it's not going to pass. No. Life, it makes me think of the Princess Bride thing. Life is pain. Anyone who tells you different is trying to sell you something. Right. It's also joy. It's also ecstatic, but it does include terrible, horrible pain, and you can't get around it. So that's what she's saying. She's saying you can't get around it. And I think part of the reason Nina stabs her is because she's like, fuck you. I want it to pass, And I don't think any of that is conscious on Nina's part.
And that's what I love about the scene so much, because there's a lot going on in their conversation, but there's a lot of subconscious subtext as well. As you just said. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to let you know we recently published issue 45, our winter issue of Backstory Magazine. It has a Dune cover, and I'm so proud of it. There are so many great things to read in it. Of course, you could read us on a desktop or laptop over at backstory.net or via our iPad app, Backstory. As a digital magazine, we're always adding new things even after we publish. And we recently added a Star Wars Visions article about the Netflix anime show, which is so fantastic. And we interviewed the directors from Japan, and that article came out great. We also did a big piece on the Nichols Fellows and what it took to become Nichols finalists, as they each did. And we run excerpts from their screenplays. And that's what's so cool about Backstory. We could always add new things to our magazine. And if you've never read us before, I hope you test drive us and read our free issue. And if you like what you've read, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you want to become a subscriber, I am here to offer you a discount coupon code of SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. And that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Backstory Magazine. Look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoom interviews go. It would mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our chat with writer-director Maggie Gyllenhaal about her debut feature film, The Lost Daughter. There's tons to talk about, but one of the things that you handled gracefully was the flashback structure, which is very difficult. I mean, you're having a different actress play the young Lita. You're putting those flashbacks in at the exact right place. But the good thing about a flashback generally, and please correct me here, is that it gives you some flexibility in editing because they could sometimes be modular, in which one that you planned to land X, you later find in your edit could go somewhere else. What did you learn about your film in the edit, and especially managing the present tense and past tense together so beautifully?
Okay, well, the flashbacks are not meant to be exposition. I'm not giving information in the flashbacks that says, oh, that's why she is the way she is.
You're telling your own story.
It's all part of what is going on in this woman's mind and in her narrative in the present, really. They're totally intertwined with the telling of the story. So because of that, the actual placement of the flashbacks, I don't know if it changed at all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The flashbacks themselves did. I definitely pulled things out and they got simpler and more abstract. And because, yeah, pretty much they didn't change. And I remember, and I loved my editor, and there were lots of other things that changed. And well, not really structurally. I didn't want to start shooting a movie. I'd never made a movie before without making sure that the structure, like, really was solid. But like, there was a whole section in the beginning, little section, but I liked it, where before she went on vacation. So you see her pass out, then you go back to her before she went on vacation. We cut that. That was gone. That we didn't need that. There were other things that we got rid of. There was a beautiful scene with Dagmara Dominchik, who plays Callie, and Leda on the beach that I cut, and I miss it and I love it. There's a little more with Peter and Jesse. And I loved that work.
Was the beach scene that you love cut for pacing?
It was just like, it like dragged us down. It wasn't even that I'm like, oh, it's too long, we have to get rid of something. It was more just like, I'm like, I lost my, keep going, even though it was so beautiful. I mean, they're such beautiful actresses. The one brilliant thing that my editor did that was not in the script is going back to Jesse at the end. Peel it like a snake. Don't let it break. At the very, very end. That was a flashback. That was a part of the very first flashback. Where very first time you see them peeling an orange. That's what I shot it to be, and we needed it at the end. It completes the movie. It's like, how did I not know that we needed that there? But I didn't when I was writing, and we realized when we were cutting. But pretty much the placement stayed the same.
That's great. Well, let's talk about the endpoint for a second. You did something really beautiful in which there's bookends. We see in the beginning this woman stumbling out of her car down onto the beach. It's clear she's bleeding under her shirt. She's been stabbed, shot. We don't know yet what's happening. And she just falls straight down. And then the rest of the movie itself is in flashback with a bookend leading back up to that point. And first off, when she leaves the apartment after being stabbed, deciding she's going home, she just kicks her suitcase down the stairs. And I'm going to use that sometime. I want to use that in my own life.
I've totally done that. But
I need to use that. But so then she stumbles and you're like, oh, where is this going to end? Are the credits going to roll when she falls back down on the beach? And you were talking earlier about mythic. It's mythic for a character to wake back up on the shores. In old mythology, sometimes that's how death itself works. They go from the shores of the living to the shores of death. And so the next morning when you see her wake up, I'm like, oh, is she dead? Is this a dream moment? It's because it was all just so great. And you just have beautiful cinematography of her waking up and taking the world around her in. And kind of having a joy about it, or at least a calm about it. And then her phone rings and it's her daughters and she's having a chat with them. And I thought that was a really cool way to end the movie. And I'm curious.
She calls them.
Pardon me, you're right. She calls them.
Yeah.
But it's a cool way to end the movie. And tell us what it took to kind of get there and some of the meanings that it had for you.
Well, I find it so interesting that there's this conversation about whether or not she's dead. It lives entirely in the imagination of the audience. It's like so interesting to me. I wonder sometimes if it's partially because we're used to seeing characters who have affairs and do something as aberrant as walking out on their kids get punished.
Right.
So we're like waiting for the punishment, But
and that's what I was talking about earlier, because if she's alive, which is another great way to look at the movie, it's even cooler because you don't get to see it that often.
Well, yeah, I have no interest in punishing her. I think she spent 20 years punishing herself.
Yeah.
But I think, how I got to it is it's opposite in a way to what the book is. The book ends, she stays in the apartment, she's been stabbed, but it's a little stab, it's not like she's like stabbed with like a butcher knife. It's a hat pin. It's still probably fucked up, but so she gets stabbed. I'm sure she's feeling horrible. And her daughters call her in the book, just a kind of coincidence. And they say in the book, Mom, we haven't heard from you in so long. We didn't know if you were dead or alive. And she says, I'm dead, but I'm fine.
Wow.
And I really struggled with that. And in fact, another note that Ferrante gave me, I changed it. I had her go to the beach. Well, not go to the beach. She gets in her car to leave and then sort of has a little accident, and which also happens in the book. But the time periods are different, So, but at the end, she gets in, she's this accident and walks down to the beach. And like I said, I think she's a hero. I think it's so terrifying. It's like a horror movie. It's like worms coming out of dolls' mouths. It's like real horror to go into your own shit. And hers is very dark and to take responsibility and look at it. And that's what she does. And it's almost unbearable. But in fact, she wakes up. And there's some little bit of relief from having been that brave. And so anyway, I write the whole thing. I have her wake up and say, and instead of her daughters calling her, she calls her daughters. And she says, I'm alive, actually, instead of I'm dead. So Ferrante reads that. And Ferrante said to me, I see what you did with the end. And I prefer it, which was very much to me made me see that what I was after, ultimately, what I was trying to do was in conversation with the book. Okay, but then I was like, it's not done. Why isn't it done? It's not done. It doesn't work. And then I stood in the shower one day and I was like, I need something magic, like your unconscious is magic. Like when I'm most alive in my life. It's got a tiny bit of a trippy nature to it. So then what occurred to me was being there. How at the end of being there, he walks away, right? And then he walks on water and you're like, what? But it just makes the whole thing mythic and bigger than this one story, which obviously it's supposed to be. And then at some point I was like, she's just going to pull out an orange. In the script, she pulls it out of her wound. And really,
she pulls the orange out of her wound in the script.
In my mind, that's what she did. But in reality, I was like, I don't know. I just wanted it to be so simple.
Yeah.
Like, my DP said to me when I was explaining to her how I wanted it to be, she said, yes, like for the children. Yeah. Like you cut away for a second and you come back and there's the orange. And I understand that's probably why people are wondering if she's dead, but she says, I'm alive. Yeah.
And it's symbolic though, because the orange was something that the daughters were fascinated with how she would cut in
Yeah.
all one, cut, like a snake peel, as they called
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
it was another great callback, even for the people that think she's dead, by the way, that
Yeah,
it's
I
symbolic.
love it. It's amazing. It's theirs. It's not mine. But in my mind, it's an orange of the mind, you
Yeah.
know? But like dead, alive, I mean, parts of us die all the time. It's
Yeah.
painful. It's horrible. Birth is painful for some new part to be born. But yeah, if people want her to be dead, like, it's okay. It's not mine anymore.
Well,
It's
and
totally
the orange is
fine.
also a symbol of rebirth too, for how she's going to go forward, because she got through this experience on this vacation. So I
Right.
mean,
And not perfectly, but
right.
like the way we rebirth ourselves, like you said, what was her mother like? And it's all a kind of a repetition. Mothers, daughters, all of it is circular.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
love it. I think it's a great ending. One of the things I've got to ask is just, what was your toughest scene as a writer on the page and as a director on this, your first feature? So on the page, what was the scene that you found yourself coming back to over and over again, sweating, rewriting, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge of that? So we'll start on the page.
yeah, it's funny. I think they probably are the same, if I'm honest. The thing that comes to mind, I mean, obviously there were difficulties in all sorts of scenes, is the octopus scene with Ed Harris and Olivia Colman. That was originally two separate scenes where he arrives with octopus, or three really. He arrives, then they go in the kitchen, and there's a long, lovely scene between them where they cook the octopus, and then another pretty long, lovely scene between them, really brilliantly acted, where they eat the octopus. And I really worked on it, partially because we don't have time to get into this, but the movie was originally set in like Maine, in Eastern Seaboard,
Okay.
lobster rolls, and when I moved it to Greece, I had to figure out, like, thank God I have Ed Harris. He's brilliant. But what's he doing in Greece?
Yeah.
And so there was a shift in that, but it also like really opened up to this toast to cruelty and really beautiful, I think, scene between them. But I struggled with that scene. I wanted it to be about a connection between them, but also about, here's a man who left his kids, and it has in a way derailed his life, but culturally in a very different way than her, and them connecting through the cruelty and the pain that they've caused, seeing in each other a kind of common something. Something's just coming to mind, which is a tiny bit of an aside, but over and over again in the cut, people said to me many times, why does he say there's water in there when he shakes the doll? And I don't have an answer for that, but I love it. And just yesterday, this old friend of ours wrote to Peter, not to me, he didn't have my number, I guess, and he had said, we love the movie and it moved us. And he said, my wife burst into tears when Ed Harris said there's water in there. That's right. Why? I don't know why that line. I don't know, but unconsciously somehow it's valuable. Anyway, so that scene, I ended up being pleased with it on the page, but I worked at it. And then they acted it so beautifully, and Helen shot it so beautifully. And then we get in the cutting room and it just doesn't work. It's like all the pieces were so excellent, but it didn't work. And then it was actually interesting. My editor kept suggesting interesting films for me to watch when we were cutting. And I had seen Don't Look Now, but not in a long time.
Yeah.
And he was talking to me about it because it's also like kind of a thriller, kind of a horror movie, kind of a drama, like ours. And so I had just seen it. I was thinking about the movie and I said, oh, what if we cut it like the sex scene in Don't Look Now, where they're making love and getting dressed at the same time? Well, what if they're making octopus and eating octopus at the same time? And I tried to get this isn't a side, but I gave myself a dare when I was writing that. I was like, I wonder if I could get octopusy into the scene, the James Bond thing. But that didn't work. But anyway, that's when it lifted. And so that was a struggle in a way, that scene. From writing, shooting was not a struggle. They were brilliant. And then to cutting, once I said that to Afonso Goncalves, who's my editor, he was like, give me a half an hour. He was really inspired by that. And he did an incredible job of, it's one scene, but it happens over 2 time periods, which that's pretty brilliant what he did, I think.
I love that scene. And I think the edits were valid. I mean, they all really make sense. So I got to commend you that knowing that you could go back to it, knowing that you could change it, I think was really important. I just want to say, I absolutely love this movie, and congrats on your first writing, directing debut. And I cannot wait to see what you do next. Maggie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Maggie Gyllenhaal for being so generous with her time and joining us today to chat about her debut feature film, The Lost Daughter. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And I'm so proud of our new issue, our winter issue. It has a Dune cover. We recently published issue 45. There's so much to explore, and we're always adding new cool articles even after we publish, because we're a digital magazine and we could do that. We just added a huge article for Star Wars Visions, the Netflix anime show. And we also added another big article for the Nichols Fellows, and you could even read excerpts from their screenplays. There is a ton to explore. If you've never read us before, I hope you check out our free issue and test drive us. And if you like what you see, and I'm sure you will, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you do want to become a subscriber, I want to sweeten the deal for you by offering you coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to find me on social media, you could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter and Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram and Backstory_mag on Instagram. I have a Facebook fan page you could reach out to. You could even email me at backstoryletters@gmail.com. The inbox gets a little full sometimes, but I go through it because I love hearing from folks and I love responding. So feel free to reach out anytime. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.